Yeah, I just want to ask this, and then we're going to move on in terms of this analogy. I just realized about a week ago, reading this, I didn't know this, that apparently a lot of members, quite ironical, of the current Israeli government are in fact descendants of the people that created the Nakba. Netanyahu's father, I didn't know, was Benzion Netanyahu, who was a member of Irgun, then Yoav Galant. I believe I read somewhere that his father, in fact, called him or named him up after the Operation Yoav, which was, the depopulation of the southern Palestine. The one thing which I want to maybe, and then we can move on to the next issue, is the classic engagement on the internal audience front. The Israelis are actually talking about genocidal plans openly, and they advocating them. And the South African application, went into detail for that. But the problem that I see in Western media is that they put this out as a kind of a byproduct of the Zionist right. But I mean, to give you an example, the Nakba was committed by the Zionist so-called left because it was labor Zionism that committed the Nakba. And they were back then presenting the image of self-defense to the external world, but were actually engaging in aggressive ethnic cleansing and advocating internally, history repeating itself. But quite strangely, I think I heard somewhere along the line, this is the first time in your writings or publicly that you've described what is happening in Israel as a genocide. You've never described past actions as being genocidal or, constituting possible genocide. Is that correct?
I've never said it because it's never been accurate, and I tried to be precise and accurate in my language. I would add to that many people.
What's different now, Professor? What's different now?
Well, what's different now is Israel is carrying out as senior European officials, senior humanitarian officials, and even liberals have pointed out that given that, number one, Gallant said from day 2, I think October 9th, the defense minister, we're not letting in any food, fuel, water, or electricity to a population that's sealed off in a concentration camp. We're not allowing in any food, fuel, water, and electricity. Number 2, that policy has not been altered. Already in November, which is a while ago at this point, already in November, late November, Human Rights Watch stated that Israel was using starvation as a weapon of war. Now, by last month, many senior European officials were saying that. Joseph Borrell, the European foreign policy chief, he said that this is a man-made famine, okay? It's a calculated, orchestrated famine. And if you just, let me just remember, well, there was another, it'll come back to me in a moment. In any case, if you're carrying out a man-made famine, a policy of starvation, and the captive population can't leave, it seems to me impossible not to conclude that this is a genocidal policy. And I would add that even if you take very mainstream figures, for example, if you look at this very mainstream fellow, Aryeh, Aryeh, Neier, Neier, who is a big name, so to speak, in the in the human rights community. He's one of the founders of Human Rights Watch, and he's one of the founders of many, many human rights organizations, and he's very mainstream. In the current issue of the New York Review of Books, he stated that there's no way at this point not to conclude that Israel is systematically starving the population of Gaza, that this is a genocide. So that's no longer, in my opinion, it's no longer a fringe or a quote unquote leftist opinion. It's the opinion of Joseph Burrell. It's the opinion of Aria Nair, the New York Review of Books, which is as mainstream as you can get. So I think it would be hard at this point not to call it a genocide. I would also add, by the way, that in the first proceedings at the ICJ on the South African application, the German judge sitting on the court, Nolte, in his statement, his separate opinion for the court, he stated that he did not believe Israel was carrying out a genocide. However, he did believe that Israel was violating Article 3 of the Genocide Convention by inciting genocide. So he's made that distinction. However, when the ICJ came before the court on additional provisional measures in March,
Yeah.
and in the court order of March 28th, Nolte had notably changed his opinion because of the whole issue of methodical, systematic starvation. And now he said Israel was in violation of Article 2, namely acts of genocide. So when you ask me what caused me to change my opinion, I would say my opinion is based on the same facts that everybody else is now adducing. If you look at my initial statements right after October 7th, when I started to say Israel is committing a genocide, and I was asked to defend it, that statement, I kept saying the same thing. If you deny food, water, electricity, and fuel to a captive population, what is going to happen? That is a no-brainer. You're going to wipe out the population. That has to be your goal. Now, of course, the claim was Israel had modified its policy. It started to admit, under US pressure, and mostly for public relations purposes, it began to admit some humanitarian aid, as I said, to appease President Biden and for PR purposes. However, that did not change the fundamental fact, which is why at the end of November, Human Rights Watch said starvation is being used as a weapon of